You know how people joke about being the family ATM? For me, it wasn't a joke. It was my reality for 5 years. I was the one who paid my sister Melissa's rent, covered her utilities, and chipped in for groceries after her husband left. The guy couldn't handle her temper, and honestly, I didn't blame him. She could be difficult, but she was my sister. And when our parents conveniently decided to pull the "we've worked hard all our lives" retirement card, the job of supporting her fell to me. And let's be clear, I wasn't some millionaire, just a regular guy with a blue-collar job, a budget, and maybe one vacation a year if I was lucky. But I kept telling myself, if I don't help her, who will? So I took it on. Diapers when her daughter Ellie was a baby. Birthday presents every year. Even that tablet Ellie wanted for school last Christmas. I gritted my teeth and told myself I was doing the right thing, even if it meant tightening my own belt. But here's the kicker. Melissa didn't stay broke. About a year ago, she got a good job, benefits, a real salary enough to keep her from drowning in bills. I figured I'd help out for a little longer, just until she got back on her feet. What I didn't expect was for her to start flaunting her new spending habits at family dinners. At first, I kept quiet, told myself maybe she just needed to enjoy life after everything she'd been through. But then last week, she crossed the line. We were all at my parents' house, me, Melissa, Ellie, our folks, and my Uncle Rob. We were halfway through dinner when Melissa casually mentioned she wanted to buy a designer purse. Not just any purse, one that cost over $500. I put down my fork. So I'm paying your rent while you buy a $500 purse? She rolled her eyes. Oh, don't be so cheap, John. That was it. Something inside me snapped. 5 years. 5 years of working overtime, saying no to things I wanted so she could stay afloat. And I was the cheap one? I didn't explode. I didn't shout. I just leaned back in my chair, took a breath, and looked around the table. Mom and Dad were suddenly very interested in their mashed potatoes. Melissa looked smug, like she'd just scored a point. Uncle Rob, he was the only one who looked even remotely uncomfortable. I cleared my throat. You want to talk about cheap? Let's talk about how I pay your rent while you shop for designer bags. Let's talk about how Mom and Dad refuse to lift a finger because they're too busy enjoying their golden years while I'm the idiot cleaning up their mess. You know what, Melissa? I shook my head, standing up. I'm done. No more rent. No more groceries. No more bills for Ellie. You're on your own. Silence. Then Uncle Rob leaned back, crossed his arms, and muttered, "Way to go, John. You don't owe anyone anything." I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. Before I walked out, I turned back to Melissa and added, "And if you think this is just me being angry, you're wrong. You're paying your rent, your bills, and your groceries from now on. As for Ellie, I hesitated. I hope she grows up better than this. But she's not my daughter. That's on you." Then I left. Uncle Rob followed, patting me on the back and muttering something about how he wished he'd said it himself. But even with his support, I couldn't shake the anger. 5 years, and I was the bad guy? This wasn't over, and I had no idea just how ugly things were about to get. A week passed. Not a word from Melissa. I wasn't expecting a thank you, but I figured there'd be at least a dramatic voicemail or a pissed-off text. Nothing. And honestly, the silence unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Then, late one night, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my parents standing there, looking annoyed. I let them in, already knowing exactly why they were here. "We need to talk about Melissa," Mom said, her voice sharp. "Do we?" I asked, leaning against the counter. "She's struggling, John," Dad added. "Ellie doesn't deserve to suffer because of your stubbornness. Don't punish the child." I laughed, not because anything was funny, because the audacity was ridiculous. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You two, who refuse to help her because you're too busy enjoying cruises and wine tastings, want to guilt me into bailing her out again?" I raised an eyebrow. "That sound about right?" "That's not fair," Mom snapped. "We're retired. You're young and capable. She's your sister. And she's your daughter," I shot back. Funny how that works. They really didn't like that. The conversation spiraled into the same old routine. Family should always help family. I was being heartless. Ellie was an innocent child. I listened for a while, then cut them off. "If you care so much," I said, "why don't you start paying her bills?" Mom scoffed. "We don't empower her like you do. She has to learn responsibility." I smiled. "Exactly. And she's never going to learn as long as someone keeps bailing her out." Dad gave me a look like I'd just kicked a puppy. "You're being cold, John. This isn't like you. Maybe not, I admitted, walking to the door and holding it open. But it's how I'll be from now on. Thanks for stopping by. They left, grumbling under their breath. And for the first time in years, I felt good about standing my ground. At least, I did, until 2 days later, when everything changed. Melissa called out of the blue. Curious, I answered. What do you want? Her voice was strangely calm, almost cheerful, too cheerful. I just wanted to let you know I'm moving out of my apartment next month. I frowned. Why? Can't afford it without me? Oh, I can afford it, she said, her tone smug. I just don't want to. I found something better. That threw me. Better? You're moving to a nicer place? Not exactly, she replied, and there was something in her voice that made my stomach twist. I'm moving back in with Mom and Dad. That hit like a punch in the gut. What? They offered, she said casually, like it was no big deal. They said they didn't want Ellie to suffer because of your little tantrum, so I'm putting my stuff in storage and moving into the guest room. Should be cozy. I was too stunned to react. All I could picture was Melissa lounging around at my parents' house, free of rent, free of responsibility, while they doted on her and made excuses for her behavior. Oh, and one more thing, she added, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. You might want to check your credit report. Just a heads up. My stomach dropped. What the hell does that mean? She laughed. You'll find out. Bye, Johnny. I hung up and immediately logged into my credit account. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a new credit card in my name, with a balance that made my head spin. Thousands of dollars, all spent at stores I'd never shopped at. Melissa had been using my identity to fund her little shopping spree. And just like that, everything changed. Helping her was one thing. Being played for a fool was something else entirely. This wasn't just about cutting her off anymore. This was war. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. Thousands of dollars in debt, all in my name. Designer stores, electronics, even airline tickets. Melissa had been living her best life on my dime, and I hadn't even noticed. I immediately called the credit card company to report the fraud, but I already knew what they were going to say. The representative confirmed my worst fear. Whoever opened the account had all my information. Name, address, social security number. This wasn't just fraud. This was identity theft, and Melissa hadn't even bothered to cover her tracks. After the call, I sat in stunned silence. I thought about Ellie, about all the sacrifices I made for her, for Melissa, and now her own mother had turned around and done this. I needed to calm down before I did something stupid. So I called the one person I trusted, Uncle Rob. He picked up on the second ring. Johnny, what's up? I exhaled. Melissa stole my identity. There was a pause, then a low whistle. That's next level crap. What are you gonna do? I don't know, I admitted. If I press charges, Ellie gets caught in the middle. But if I don't, Melissa gets away with it. Rob sighed. Look, you're my nephew, so I'll support you either way. But let's be real. Melissa isn't gonna stop unless someone makes her. He was right. This wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I needed to know my rights, what my options were. Melissa had royally screwed up. She had used my name, but hadn't done anything to hide it. Every charge led directly back to her. The attorney confirmed what I suspected. I had an airtight case. But then he suggested something I hadn't considered: negotiation. Sometimes the threat of legal action is enough to make people do the right thing, he explained. I wasn't sure Melissa was capable of doing the right thing, but fine, I'd give her a chance. That evening I called her. She picked up immediately, like she'd been expecting me. Hey, Johnny, she said, all fake sweetness. What's up? I didn't play along. Cut the crap, Melissa. I know about the credit cards. Silence. Then a nervous laugh. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, I snapped. I already reported the fraud. I have a lawyer. Every single charge is tied to your name. Her tone changed instantly. Johnny, look, it's not what you think. I was gonna pay it back. Things got tight and save it. My voice was ice. Here's what's gonna happen. You're paying back every cent. If you don't, I'm pressing charges. And you can explain yourself to a judge. Your choice. There was a long pause. Then she tried a different tactic. Johnny, please. Ellie, I cut her off. Don't drag Ellie into this. She's the only reason I'm even giving you this chance. And then I hung up. I knew Melissa. She wasn't the type to accept consequences without a fight. But I had given her a choice. Now, it was up to her. A week later, my phone rang. It was my credit card company. The fraudulent accounts had been paid in full. I was relieved, surprised even. Maybe Melissa had actually done the right thing for once. Then I got the full story, and the relief didn't last long. Apparently, Melissa had gone crying to my parents, and they, despite all their talk about not empowering her, had paid off her debt using the money they had been saving for a winter vacation to the Caribbean. When I heard that, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was either laugh or scream. A day later, my phone rang again. It was Mom. I stupidly thought she might be calling to admit they were wrong, but the second I answered, she hissed, "Are you happy now?" I frowned. "Excuse me? You ruined everything," she snapped. "We had to give Melissa the money we were saving for our trip, and now we're stuck here for the winter because of you." I took a deep breath. "Let me get this straight," I said. "I ruined everything, not Melissa, who stole my identity and put me thousands of dollars in debt. Not you and Dad, who refused to help her for years and dumped everything on me. No, it's my fault. You didn't have to threaten her like that," Mom shot back. "You could have worked it out as a family." I almost laughed. "We tried, remember? For 5 years, I was the one working things out. And look where it got me. You didn't have to get lawyers involved, John," she yelled. "She's your sister, and I'm your son," I shot back. "Funny how that doesn't seem to matter when it comes to me, huh?" Silence. Then Mom's voice turned cold. "You're not the man I thought you were." I exhaled slowly. "Good, because I'm finally the man I should have been all along. One who doesn't let his family walk all over him." She hung up, and I didn't hear from her again for days. But I knew this wasn't over. Melissa wasn't the type to let something like this go. And I was right, because a week later I ran into Ellie at her school play, and everything got worse. Melissa had told me about the play, and of course, I showed up. Not for her, for Ellie. She was on stage, singing with her classmates, and when she spotted me in the crowd, she beamed. After the performance, we gathered in the school gym for refreshments. Ellie ran up to me, her face lit up, and I handed her a small bouquet of flowers. "Thanks, Uncle John," she said, hugging me. That's when Melissa appeared, and of course she had to make a scene. She crossed her arms. "Really, John? Flowers? Are you trying to buy her love now?" I ignored her. Turned back to Ellie. "You did great up there, kid. I'm proud of you." Ellie smiled. But Melissa wasn't done. Louder this time, she said. "You know, it's funny how you can afford flowers, but you couldn't find it in your heart to keep helping your family." A few heads turned. My face heated up. I turned to her, my voice low. "Are you really going to do this here?" She smirked. "Why not? You already embarrassed me in front of everyone. Might as well make it a full set." I sighed, turned to leave. But then she said something that made me stop cold. Ellie deserves better. She deserves an uncle who actually cares about her, not someone who uses her to make himself feel better. I turned back, my voice firm. "You don't get to play that card, Melissa. Not after what you've done. And I'm not going to stand here while you try to turn Ellie against me." I met her gaze, steady. "She's not stupid. One day, she'll see the truth." And then I walked out, because I meant every word. The fallout from that night was immediate. The next morning, my phone rang. Mom. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I already knew she wasn't going to stop. I sighed and picked up. "How could you?" she snapped before I even said hello. "At Ellie's recital, of all places?" I rubbed my temples. "Did Melissa tell you what she said to me?" "It doesn't matter," Mom shot back. "You're supposed to be the bigger person." I let out a dry laugh. "I was the bigger person for 5 years. And look where it got me." Mom's voice turned cold. "Well, you've made your point. You can stop punishing her now." I clenched my jaw. "This isn't punishment. It's consequences. Maybe if you and Dad had taught her that when we were kids, we wouldn't be in this mess." She was silent for a long moment. Then click, she hung up. And just like that, whatever was left of our relationship shattered. A week later, something happened that I never expected. Ellie showed up at my door. When I opened it, she was standing there with a backpack slung over her shoulder, tears in her eyes. "Mom told me I can't call you anymore," she whispered. "But I don't want to stop seeing you." My heart broke. I knelt down and hugged her. "You never have to stop seeing me, Ellie. I'm always here for you," she sniffled. "I don't want to go back." I pulled back, frowning. "What do you mean? I hate it there," she muttered, kicking the ground. "Mom and Grandma are always fighting, and they talk about you all the time." I felt my stomach twist. Ellie wasn't just caught in the middle, she was being weaponized. I took a deep breath. "Come inside," I said quietly. "We'll figure this out." Ellie sat on my couch, hands wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa. She looked small. I'd always known her as a bright, confident kid, but tonight, she just seemed tired. We talked for a long time about school, her friends, her favorite books. Then, finally, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why does everyone fight so much?" she whispered. "Why can't we just get along?" I exhaled, searching for the right words. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I said. "Big ones. And if we don't fix them, they can hurt the people around us." I hesitated. "That's what happened with your mom and me. But none of this is your fault. Do you understand that?" She nodded but didn't look convinced. "Mom says you hate us." I felt something tighten in my chest. "I don't hate anyone, Ellie," I said firmly. "I love you, and I want what's best for you." She stared into her cocoa, processing that. "So, you're not mad at me?" I shook my head. "Never." I hesitated before adding, "Listen, kiddo, when you grow up, you're gonna have to make tough decisions too. People will try to push you around, make you feel small, but you don't have to let them. You're strong, Ellie, stronger than you know." She finally smiled, a small, hesitant thing, but it was something. When it was time to take her home, she looked reluctant to leave, but I promised her, "No matter what your mom says, I'll always be here for you." As we pulled up to my parents' house, the front door flew open. Melissa stormed outside, her face furious. "What is she doing here?" she snapped, glaring at me. I stepped out of the car calmly. "Relax. She just needed some space." We talked, and I brought her home. Melissa opened her mouth to argue, but Ellie stepped forward. "Mom, stop." Melissa froze. "I wanted to see Uncle John," Ellie said firmly. For once, Melissa had nothing to say. She just stared at Ellie, speechless. I took the opportunity to kneel down and hug Ellie one last time. I whispered in her ear, "Remember what I said. You're strong." She nodded, and then I got in my car and drove away. The months that followed weren't easy. My parents were still pissed at me. Family gatherings were tense. Melissa continued playing the victim, leaning into her role as the poor single mom who had been wronged by her selfish brother. Mom and Dad weren't much better. Every time I saw them, they found a way to slip in some guilt trip, some comment about family loyalty, or how hard it was to see Melissa struggle. Never mind the fact that her struggle consisted of living in their house, eating their food, and doing absolutely nothing to fix her life. The only bright spot? Ellie? She started standing up for herself more. Even with Melissa, she insisted on calling me regularly. And eventually, Melissa just gave up trying to stop her. But the biggest surprise? Uncle Rob. He started stepping up in ways I never expected. He reached out to Ellie, directly helping her with school projects, taking her out for ice cream when things got rough at home. It wasn't the same as fixing everything, but it gave Ellie another safe place to go. One evening, Ellie called me just to chat. Halfway through the conversation, she hesitated. Then she said something that stuck with me. "Uncle John? Yeah, kiddo. Thanks for always believing in me." I smiled. "Of course." She paused. Then, quietly, she added, "I always remember what you said." "What's that?" "I'm strong." For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me, because I realized no matter how bad things got, no matter how broken our family was, I had made a difference. Ellie wasn't turning into Melissa. She was turning into herself, and that was worth everything. A year passed. My dad was still pretending I didn't exist. My mom still threw passive-aggressive jabs whenever we crossed paths. And Melissa, she was still living off them, still playing the poor single mom card to anyone who would listen. But I didn't care. I was done worrying about them. I had my life back. I had peace. And most importantly, I still had Ellie. I never expected to hear from my dad again. But then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It was Mom. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. I picked up. "Your father wants to see you," she said, skipping any kind of greeting. I almost laughed. "Now he wants to see me?" She sighed, clearly annoyed. "He's been asking for months. I told him not to bother, but he won't let it go. So I'm telling you now." I leaned against my kitchen counter. "Why should I care?" She hesitated. Then, softer than before, said, "I don't know, John. Maybe you don't," but he asked. And I told him I'd pass the message. I was quiet for a moment. Then, finally, I said, "Fine." Not because I wanted to fix things, not because I missed him. I just wanted to hear what he had to say. Seeing him again was weird. I expected him to be angry, resentful, the way he was the last time we spoke, but he wasn't. He looked old, tired, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. We sat across from each other in silence. Then he exhaled and said, "I messed up." And for the first time in my life, he actually apologized. Not some half-hearted, "I'm sorry you felt that way" type of thing. A real apology. He admitted everything. How he failed me. How he let his favoritism toward Melissa blind him. How he should have done more, been better. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said. "But I was just being a fool. I didn't say anything. I just let him talk." And in the end, when he finally asked, "Can you forgive me?" I did. Not for him, for me. Because holding on to all that anger, it was exhausting. And whether I forgave him or not, it wouldn't change what happened. It wouldn't fix my relationship with my mother or Melissa. But at least this way, I didn't have to carry that weight anymore. I looked him in the eye and said, "I forgive you." Then I added, "But that doesn't mean we can go back to how things were." He nodded, like he already knew that. And after that, I left. I haven't visited him again. And honestly, I don't know if I ever will. Melissa never apologized. And I never expected her to. She still acts like she did nothing wrong, still plays the victim, still gets taken care of by mom and dad. But that's not my problem anymore. I stopped being the family ATM. I stopped being the doormat. And the world didn't end. If anything, my life got better. I had more money, more time, more peace of mind. And most importantly, I still had Ellie. She kept calling me, kept visiting, kept standing up for herself more and more every day. She was growing. She wasn't turning into Melissa. She was becoming her own person. And that was all I ever wanted. A few months ago, Ellie sent me a hand-drawn card. Inside, it said, "Thank you for always believing in me. I'll always remember what you said. I'm strong, it wasn't much, but it reminded me standing my ground had been worth it. And as long as Ellie was okay, that was enough." Story 2, my name's Lisa. I'm 49 years old, young or old, depending on the day and how much my back hurts. If you're expecting a story about fairy tales or a life full of adventure, I hate to disappoint. What you're getting instead is a story about love, sacrifice, and betrayal, the kind that knocks the air right out of you. At the center of it all is my daughter, Rachel, my girl, my everything. Raising her alone wasn't the plan, but life rarely cares about plans. Her father, David, decided he needed a fresh start on the other side of the world, no less. One day, we were a family. The next, he was gone, swapping us out like last season's wardrobe. Soon after, he had a brand new family, and Rachel and I became nothing but a memory to him. So, it was just us, me and Rachel against the world. My days blurred together in an endless cycle of shifts. Mornings at the diner, nights at the bar, and, if I was lucky, the occasional cleaning job squeezed in between. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, but every time I saw Rachel smile, every time I heard her laugh, it made it all worth it. Rachel, though bless her heart, never quite found her footing. At 24, she'd had more jobs than I could count, and not one of them ever stuck. The manager's a jerk. The customers are crazy. They expect too much for too little pay. Excuses. Always excuses. Each job ended with her right back on our couch, phone in one hand, remote in the other. And me? I just couldn't bring myself to stay mad. "It's okay, honey," I'd say, swallowing the frustration that gnawed at me. "Something better will come along." Because that's what you do when you love someone. You carry their burdens so they don't have to. But that didn't stop the worry from creeping in. One particularly rough day, after a grueling double shift that left me more bone than flesh, I came home to find Rachel sprawled across the sofa, job applications scattered around her like confetti. "Hey, Ma," she greeted, eyes fixed on the TV. "Hey, kiddo, any luck today?" I asked, peeling off my coat along with the weight of the day. She shrugged. "Nah, it's all garbage. None of these places want to pay a living wage." I sighed, too exhausted to argue. "We've talked about this, Rachel. You gotta start somewhere," she scoffed. "Easy for you to say. You're used to busting your back for peanuts." That one stung, but anger never had a place in our home. Instead of snapping back, I forced a tired smile. "Maybe so, kiddo. but those peanuts kept a roof over our heads and food on the table. Someday, you'll understand. She rolled her eyes, the universal sign of young adult disdain. Sure, Ma, I'm going to bed. And just like that, she was gone, disappearing into her room while I stayed behind, picking up the remnants of her latest failure. I wanted so much for her, but how do you teach someone to fight for a future when they never had to worry about survival? Life has a funny way of blindsiding you. Just when you think you've got a handle on things, it hits you with something you never saw coming. That's exactly what happened the night Rachel dropped her little bombshell. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were meatloaf nights. I was elbow deep in ground beef when Rachel waltzed into the kitchen, practically glowing. Behind her stood Daniel, a guy I'd seen maybe once or twice before. He was decent enough, I suppose, but something about him always rubbed me the wrong way. Ma, guess what? Rachel chirped, bouncing on her heels. I glanced over, raising an eyebrow. You finally cleaned your room? She rolled her eyes but grinned. No, funny lady. Better. Daniel and I got married. The world tilted. My stomach dropped. Married? My voice didn't even sound like mine. Daniel stepped forward, flashing a nervous smile. Yeah, Miss SS. We eloped last weekend. Surprise? 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 I stared at them, trying to process what I'd just heard. Married. My daughter got married and didn't think to tell me until now. Eloped? I echoed, gripping the edge of the counter. And you're just telling me this now? Rachel's excitement dimmed, replaced by the familiar defensive edge. I knew all too well. I knew you'd react like this, Ma, she muttered. That's why we didn't tell you before. But it's done. And we're happy, right, Daniel? He nodded, wrapping an arm around her. Totally happy. I put down the mixing spoon and wiped my hands on my apron. This conversation needed my full attention. And where, exactly, do you plan on living? I asked, already dreading the answer. Rachel blinked. Well, here, obviously. My breath caught. Here? Yeah, Ma. Where else? I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. Rachel, honey, you're married now. Don't you think it's time you and Daniel start your own life? Somewhere that's not here? Her face fell. Ma, you know we can't afford that. Daniel's job doesn't pay much. And I'm still looking, right. The eternal job hunter. I glanced at Daniel, who remained suspiciously silent, letting Rachel do all the talking. Something about the set of his jaw irked me, like he had already made himself comfortable in my home. Look, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice even. I love you, Rachel. You know I do. But this isn't what I wanted for you. Her response was swift and sharp. What, Ma? You didn't want me to be happy? I shook my head. No, of course not. I thought you'd want more. She crossed her arms. More what? More crappy jobs? More nights alone? No thanks. The conversation spiraled from there, both of us throwing words like daggers. Daniel tried to chime in once or twice, but he might as well have been a fly buzzing around a hurricane. In the end, we called a truce, but the air remained thick with unspoken words. Daniel moved in the next day, his belongings filling the spaces that had always been just mine and Rachel's. The house, once filled with warmth, suddenly felt too small. I retreated, shrinking into myself, wondering where I'd gone wrong. How had my little girl grown into someone so different from the dreams I once had for her? And then, just when I thought I'd seen the worst of it, life hit me with another gut punch. I was sick, and this time I wasn't sure I had the strength to fight. You ever get hit with news so bad that for a moment the whole world just stops? That's what it felt like sitting in that cold, sterile doctor's office when I heard the word cancer. The doctor was gentle, explaining the treatment plan, the odds, the timeline, but it all blurred together. White noise against the roaring panic in my head. Cancer. The kind that could be treated, but not without a fight. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I had the strength to fight back. Then came the second gut punch. You'll need to take time off work, Lisa. Focus on your health. Time off? Work was the only thing keeping the roof over our heads. Work was survival, but my body was already failing me. I couldn't afford to push it further. I swallowed the panic, nodded like I had a choice, and walked out of that office feeling like I was carrying a weight too heavy to bear. When I got home, the house was quiet. Rachel was in her room, probably scrolling on her phone, and Daniel was, wherever he usually was. I didn't care. I just knew I needed them. So I called them into the living room. My hands trembled as I tried to keep my voice steady. Guys, we need to talk. Rachel barely glanced up. What's up, Ma? I took a deep breath. I have cancer. silence. For a second, I thought maybe this would be the moment my daughter stepped up, showed me that all these years of sacrifice meant something, that she cared. Instead, her brows knitted together, and the first words out of her mouth were, "But what does that mean for us?" I blinked. "What?" Rachel leaned forward. "Like, if you're not working, how are we supposed to afford everything?" My stomach twisted. Daniel, who had been silent until now, rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, Lisa. I mean, I don't make enough to cover all the bills. And Rachel's still looking for something steady." I stared at them, waiting, praying for one of them to say something that wasn't about money, about rent, about their damn convenience. Rachel sighed. "We just need to be practical here, Ma. You can't just quit and expect everything to be okay." I let out a shaky breath, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with my illness. "Practical," I repeated, my voice hollow. That was the moment it hit me. I wasn't a mother to Rachel anymore. I was a safety net, a backup plan, a walking paycheck. I should have seen it sooner. Weeks passed, and the treatments drained me faster than I ever imagined. The chemo, the nausea, the crushing fatigue, it was like my body was at war with itself. But the worst part wasn't the sickness. It was coming home every day to a house that no longer felt like home. Rachel and Daniel treated me less like family and more like an inconvenience, like I was just taking up space. One night, I was trying to make myself a cup of tea when my hands, weak and trembling, betrayed me. The mug slipped, shattering on the floor. Rachel stormed into the kitchen, eyes flashing. "Seriously, Ma? Can't you do anything right?" I froze. She stood there, arms crossed, looking down at me like I was some helpless old woman instead of her mother. "I'm sorry," I murmured, my voice small. Daniel walked in, glancing at the mess before muttering under his breath, so tired of this, so tired of this." I gritted my teeth. They were tired? They weren't the ones fighting for their life. I looked at my daughter, this stranger standing in my kitchen, and for the first time, I realized something gut-wrenching. I didn't recognize her anymore. The worse I got, the colder they became. Asking for help was met with eye rolls and sighs. They spoke to me like I was a burden, an obligation. One night, I struggled to get up from the couch and called out to Rachel. Can you help me up?" She groaned. "Mom, I have things to do. You'll be fine." Things to do? Like what? Sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone while Daniel played video games? I never imagined my own child would treat me like this. The stress was making everything worse. My body weakened, and eventually, I ended up in the hospital again. I thought maybe, just maybe, Rachel would finally step up. But days passed, and I barely heard from her. The visits were rare, and when she did show up, it was out of obligation. Until one day, she walked in with that look on her face, the one that meant she wanted something. "Hey, Ma," she said, awkwardly standing at the foot of my bed. "How you feeling?" I was too tired to pretend. "What do you want, Rachel?" She hesitated before sighing. "It's about the house." My stomach twisted. "What about it?" She shifted, looking uncomfortable. "Daniel and we think it'd be best if you signed it over to us." I stared at her. "Excuse me?" She squared her shoulders, the hesitation gone. "It just makes sense, Ma. Daniel doesn't like feeling like a guest in his own home, and we should be able to make it ours." I felt like I'd been sucker punched. "You want me to sign my house over to you?" Rachel nodded, as if this was the most normal request in the world. "It's practical. You're, well, sick, and who knows how long you'll be in and out of the hospital. It's just logical to put it in our names." My blood ran cold. "Logical," I echoed. "Because I'm sick? I should just hand over everything I worked for?" She crossed her arms. "It's not like you're going to be around forever, Ma." I flinched. The words were like a slap, leaving me breathless. I stared at my daughter, the child I raised alone, the child I worked myself to the bone for. And this was what she thought of me? Not as a mother, not as a person, but as a stepping stone to her own comfort. A deep, eerie calm settled over me. "You think I'm selfish?" I asked quietly. Rachel scoffed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I nodded slowly. "I see," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "Ma, I thought you'd understand." I stared at her for a long moment. "I do understand, Rachel." My voice was steady. "I understand perfectly." She brightened. "So, you'll know." Her face twisted in frustration. "God, Ma, why are you being so difficult? We're just thinking about the future." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. So am I. Rachel rolled her eyes and stormed out. I sat there, gripping the sheets, seething. I had spent my whole life sacrificing for Rachel, giving her everything, and now, when I needed her most, she wanted to steal the only thing I had left. The house I fought to keep. My home. No. Rachel had no idea who she was messing with. You ever reach a moment so clear, so undeniable, that everything just clicks? That was me, sitting in that hospital bed, watching my daughter walk out after trying to steal my house. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was just done. I had given Rachel everything. My time, my money, my love. I had broken my back for her, bent over backward to make sure she never had to struggle the way I did. And in return, she had the audacity to look me in the eye and act like I was just a stepping stone to her and Daniel's comfortable little future. No, she wanted to play dirty? Then so would I. A few days after that conversation, I got a call from my friend Janice. She's been in real estate since we were teenagers, knows the market inside and out. And when I saw her name pop up on my phone, my gut told me something was wrong. Lisa, she started, her voice hesitant. I don't know how to tell you this, but I saw a listing today. Your house. My blood ran cold. What? Rachel and Daniel, they're trying to sell it. The world spun. I gripped the edge of my hospital bed, knuckles white. That's impossible. The house is in my name. Janice hesitated. Lisa, they forged your signature. They filed to transfer the deed to their names. I felt like I was drowning. Are you sure? As sure as I'm standing here. I thought it was a mistake, but I checked the documents myself. It's all in their names now. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Rachel and Daniel didn't just want me out of my own home. They wanted to sell it out from under me. It was the final straw. My next call was to Mike, an old college friend who had gone into law. He was sharp, ruthless when necessary, and most importantly, not the type to let something like this slide. After I explained the situation, he let out a slow breath. Lisa, this is bad, but we can fight it. First, we file for an injunction to stop the sale. Then, we hit them with forgery and undue influence. If we act fast, we can reverse the transfer. I nodded, gripping the phone tight. Do it. Whatever it takes. Mike didn't waste time. Within days, he had a legal team tearing through paperwork, building our case. Meanwhile, I did what I had always done. I played the long game. At home, I acted normal. Rachel and Daniel had no idea I knew. They carried on, pretending everything was fine, probably thinking I was too weak, too naive to catch on. They were so sure they had won, but I wasn't just lying down and taking it. I was waiting. A week later, Janice and I put my real plan into motion. She set up a fake buyer, one of her real estate friends, and arranged a house showing. Meanwhile, I got discharged from the hospital just in time to make an appearance. When I showed up at my own damn house, Rachel's face went white. Mom, what are you doing here? I smiled, stepping inside. Oh, I'm just here to check out the house, since it's for sale. Daniel swallowed hard. Lisa, this is a misunderstanding. Oh, I bet it is. I turned to Janice's friend, the buyer. So, what's the asking price? Because I'd love to hear what my daughter thinks my home is worth. Rachel opened her mouth, closed it, then glared at Daniel. You were supposed to handle this, she hissed under her breath. Too late. I stepped back onto the porch, pulled out my phone, and made one final call. Yeah, officer. I'd like to report forgery and attempted real estate fraud. The fall Rachel and Daniel never saw it coming. Within hours, the police arrived. And let me tell you, watching them get hauled away in handcuffs, it was like taking a deep breath after years of suffocating. They screamed, they begged, they cried. Mom, please, you can't do this. Lisa, we can fix this, just talk to us. But I just stood there, arms crossed, silent. They had already shown me who they were, and I believed them. The legal battle took months, but with Mike's help, I got the house back. The courts ruled in my favor. Rachel and Daniel had no legal claim to it. And as for them, a slap on the wrist sentence, but enough to ruin their reputation. Employers don't take kindly to fraud charges, and good luck finding a landlord who'd rent to known con artists. As for me, for the first time in forever, I was free. No more Rachel draining my bank account. No more Daniel treating me like an inconvenience. No more walking on eggshells in my own damn home. At first, the silence was strange, but then it was peace. The aftermath word got around, as it always does in small towns. Some people shook their heads, whispering about how I turned my back on my own daughter. But most understood. They saw me in the grocery store, at the pharmacy, on my porch with Janice. and they nodded, silent approval. Because anyone who's ever been betrayed by family knows the truth sometimes. Blood isn't thicker than peace. Rachel reached out once, a half-assed apology buried under excuses. I was desperate, Ma. I didn't respond. Because here's the thing, I forgave her. Not for her, for me. But forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. Rachel made her choices, and I made mine. In the afternoon, as I sat on my porch, Janice plopped down beside me with a sigh. "You're looking better every day," she said. I smiled. A real one, feeling better too. Funny how peace can heal you in ways medicine can't. Janice nodded. "Not everyone agrees with what you did, you know."